So I appreciate this opportunity to walk you through some geek type stuff. But considering the fact that this is a space in which we played for quite some time, we are extremely excited about it. I would just tell you that as part of in terms of referencing my background, I grew up here in the Twin Cities. I went to Mounds View High School many years ago. And then when I graduated from Mounds View, I went on to Drake, as Brian alluded to. Another interesting fact is I come from a long line of Baptist ministers. So if this gets to be a little didactic, an occasional amen would be just fine. I would also say that the household in which I grew up, my mother was a valedictorian. My father was a drill sergeant in the Army and became an MP over in Korea. So you can imagine the intensity of the household in which I grew up. So I come to you with greetings. I would tell you again that I'm very proud and happy to be here. So digging right in, one of the things that we began to, or that I began to do in terms of thinking about putting this book together and talking about organizational alignment was to harken back to my experiences in growing up and then on into my professional career. So I started out, I can recall when I was 15 years old, I'm outside, I'm cutting the grass, I've got the Walkman on. For those of you that don't know what that is, I'm not going to explain. And I've got the music playing and I'm zipping through, I'm trying to get the grass cut as quickly as possible so I can get on to Super America and grab a big gulp with some donuts with my buddies. And this is back in the early 80s. And so afterwards, I get done cutting the grass, and the drill sergeant comes out to take a peek and inspect what kind of work I've done. And we're standing there looking at it, and we can see that there's this strip of grass that I've missed. And he looks at me and says, "Art, is this your best work?" And I looked at that and I said, "No, Dad, it's not my best work." He said, "When will we see your best work?" Cut the grass. Communication. That was the message, right? By asking effective questions, we can get to the solution. We don't have to berate the individual, but by asking effective questions, we can get there. So that was one of the pillars of organizational alignment. Next one. A couple of years later, I got my driver's license, and curfew to have the car in is 11 o'clock. I come rolling in at 11:07. Guess who meets me at the door? Same guy, drill sergeant, right in my face. What time is curfew? It's 11 o'clock. What time is it now? It's 11:07. Will we ever have to have this conversation again? We will not have this conversation again. Which is accountability. This concept of, are we truly accountable to the things that matter most? I went to Drake University. I ran track there. You can't tell that now, but 50 pounds ago, I actually was relatively competitive. But I was kind of like the Rudy of the track team. I was that individual that tried really hard, but wasn't super good. And so the coach kind of tapped me on the shoulder after I was unable to place in a single event almost a year into it, and said, "We'd like for you to become a captain." And for those of you that know what that is, it's grueling and it's boring and you train by yourself and you hate it. So I said no. And then he quickly said, "Well, then that's the end of your track career, because this is pretty much it." And at that point in time, I learned teamwork. You sign up, you do what's required of you, you contribute as best you can, and that's just pretty much it. So teamwork, another element. When I graduated from Drake, I came back to work in the Twin Cities at a copier company, copy duplicating products, CDP, if I remember that. The old CDP commercials way back used to do North Star, too many young folks in this room. So one of the interesting things about that was they had this compensation plan that said, hey, you get 15% of the gross profit margin that you bring in. So I quickly learned that if I sell the new stuff and give it away almost at cost, and then take in the old stuff and sell that at a zero cost basis, I can make a fair amount of money. So here I'm fresh out of college, I made like $60,000 my first year, which is unheard of back then, but it was a function of creativity, right? Looking at that compensation plan and figuring out where the opportunities lie. Creativity. I was recruited away from CDP by a company called IBM. And for those of you that are familiar with the training program, that's a 9-month process. And The process goes like this. You join the company, you take a test before you go into training. If you fail the test, you're fired. If you pass the test, you get to go to training. The training's in Marietta, Georgia. So I flew down to Georgia. After I passed the test, you have to take it again to make sure you didn't cheat. Pass the test, you can go into training, and once you're done with training, in 9 months of this stuff, you can finally call on a customer. The process of development of the individual that IBM had back in those days was bar none the best in the world. The only thing that maybe rivaled it during that period of time was maybe Xerox. So that training and development became a critical element. So I, again, add this to the mix of the 9 pillars of organizational alignment. US West, my wife served as, actually was the President's Club winner, Sales Rep of the Year at US West. And the outcome of that was, as a spouse, I got to go to Hawaii and have a good time, and we're playing beach volleyball. And I got a chance to meet the CEO there. He tapped me on the shoulder and said, Art, we'd like for you to consider a position with US West. 3 months later, I was on board. And one of the things I learned from John Kelly, who's one of the most phenomenal leaders that I've come across, was this concept of not only leadership, but the concept of empowerment. The degree to which you can push decision-making down into the organization to get faster, better decisions. He was one of the best I've ever seen at specifically doing that. Then once Quest Communications bought US West, and I began this consulting practice, I got a call from Medtronic. And Medtronic called and said, hey, we'd like you to come in for an informational interview. I came in, I thought this was great. I could do some consulting work there. And it was interesting because Medtronic, this wonderful company, in the Twin Cities, doing phenomenal work, very much community-minded. I learned the value of mission and vision. So Bill George, speaker, I'm sure you heard plenty of this concept of mission and vision. There's a process once you come on board called the medallion ceremony. And this is for every single employee within the organization. You go through this. They take the most tenured individual in the company that stands in front of the group of new employees and basically walks you through the process of what the Medtronic way is. Alleviate pain, restore health, and extend life. So you can see it's still top of mind. But then that medallion ceremony is like a brainwashing process of making sure that, hey, wait a minute, are you in the right place? If you're not about these things, you don't belong here. But if you are about these things and you're unclear about what we're asking you to do on a day-to-day basis, just look back to the mission and vision. And these become our guardrails in terms of what it is and who it is we are and how we go about being our true, authentic self, not only in our work, but with our clients and customers as well. It's interestingly, I spoke to a graduate school class at Villanova about 6 years ago. And there's 44 students in the class. These are middle managers and above. I pulled out a $100 bill and I asked, who in this audience or in this class can recite the mission of their company? Again, middle managers all the way up through senior management. Only 2 attempted it, and only 1 was close. So what we've learned, not only from that, but from the experience of Medtronic, but then the work we're doing today, is that many folks in organizations are not even clear what the mission is, let alone the ability to go restate it. So there's a huge opportunity as leaders, as we think about what it is we're trying to accomplish. If we want to sear or imbue this mission and vision in the very fabric of the organization, it begins with understanding what it is and communicating it effectively. The last pillar that I want to talk about is this concept of best practices. And this came about in the work that we do at Infinity Systems. What we've done is put together an instrument that measures organizational alignment. So I have been literally all over the world working with organizations, leadership teams, contemplating what does an aligned organization look like. We've all seen it. Whether it's been a function of a sports team that's perfected a play, or a quarter, or an orchestra, performing the bolero. It doesn't matter what it is, but that concept of coming together and all the oars hitting the water at the same time, and every other metaphor you can think of that speaks to this concept of alignment, we know it when we see it. We felt it. We've been a part of organizations, and I see a lot of heads nodding. We've been a part of organizations that have accomplished it, and it's phenomenal. but it is a dynamic event and subject to change based upon a lot of different things that we'll get into in just a second. So if we could just quickly pull up the first slide, that'd be great. So these are the things that we measure. We've gone through the painful process of working with several PhDs from reputable institutions that have helped us formulate the right kind of questions, 21 questions in total. So in 7 to 8 minutes, we can quickly ascertain the level of organizational alignment that exists within an organization. So you see the 9 constructs reflected there. Mission, vision, is it clear to the folks in the organization? Communication, is communication bidirectional? Creativity, do we have a way to capture the good ideas within the organization? And do we have a mechanism by which we can imbue these ideas into the organization? Accountability, it's interesting. You know, everybody talks about creating a culture of accountability. Anybody know what that begins with? It begins with empowerment. Unless you're running a paramilitary organization and telling people what to do, people have to feel empowered. Because when you want to go and recognize them for the work that they've done, it has to be something that they've done, not something you told them to do. Otherwise, you're just recognizing yourself. So it's critical as we look at accountability, this empowerment score has to be there too. Teamwork, we talked about that. That's the idea of the smooth handoffs. Do we work well as a team? Leadership, what we're looking for there is, are the leaders somebody that we can trust within the organization? Do we believe that they're taking us in the direction that we need to go? Development, I talked briefly about that, but this concept of sharpening the saw, am I getting better at what it is that I do? Am I given the tools necessary to be effective in what it is that you're asking me to do? And then last but not least, best practices. And this is one of the things that we struggle with, not only at IBM, but also at Medtronic. It's this idea that we've hired the best and the brightest, therefore there's no need to look outside our doors. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. The way that we can get healthier and better as an organization is through benchmarking and looking at how other organizations have done that. And the beauty of the work that we've done as an organization has been able to capture just a fair amount of that. Let's define organizational alignment real quick, and then we'll go to the next slide. Organizational alignment specifically is the strength of harmony between strategy, structure, and culture. I think we've all seen the Harvard Business Review paper on strategy and the fact that culture eats strategy for lunch. There's no secret there. You can have the most wonderful strategy or the most profound structure, but if the culture isn't one that's accepting of that, it will not work. And we have all kinds of data that can speak to this. If we could just quickly go to the next slide. So this is the space in which we play. When we began this process of specifically measuring organizational alignment, what we were looking for is, what does an aligned organization look like? So we're clear on the definition of what it is, but also where are the choke points? So if you think about this, start on the upper left-hand side there, you can see the mission. What is the mission? Who is it? Who are we? And how are we going to project ourselves to the broader world? But then the vision is, what will the world look like if we accomplish our mission? And then ultimately we get into, what is our strategic plan? What are the goals and objectives of the organization? We put an action plan together. Do we have budget or not? So on and so forth. Once we obtain funding, we allocate resources. We communicate what we're going to do. The point of this chart is this. If for some reason the strategic plan is incongruent with the vision, or the vision is incongruent with the strategic plan, in other words, we're charging the organization to go do something that's inconsistent with the vision, we're misaligned. If for some reason we've decided that we're going to make a certain part of the organization strategic and we underfund it, we basically set the leader of that organization up to fail, and they are going to begin to do things that ultimately sabotage the success of the organization. So as a leader, we need to quickly find out where the areas of occlusion are and where the opportunities are for growth and development in terms of getting the rocks out of the road and making it such that we can move through this thing with impunity. One of the other interesting things that we learned in this work is that as we go about this process of becoming an aligned organization, I mentioned to you that it's a moment in time. It's dynamic. Things can happen in a moment's notice. A macro environment thing like a pandemic hits. What does that do to alignment? a leadership change. What does that do to alignment? A strategy change. Any one of these things can cause an organization to become misaligned, and we know what that looks like. Voluntary turnover goes up, profitability is going down, market share begins to go down. There are all kinds of ways that we can identify it. Disgruntled employees arguing at the water cooler. We have countless examples of what misalignment looks like. But in order to not only become an aligned entity, but to sustain it over time, we have to look at our culture. So we began the process of taking a deep dive as an organization into this culture aspect of an organization. And the tool that Brian alluded to, Equimetrics, was launched just a little bit over a year ago, about a year and a half ago. And the beauty of that is we have been able to, in 28 questions with, again, a group of about 5 PhDs, come up with formulated questions that ultimately help us ascertain the cultural competency of an organization. So what does that mean? So if we think about it, are we aware of all the different cultures that exist within the organization? Are we aware of them? Secondly, do we accept the different cultures that exist? And then thirdly, do we appreciate them? And so this measurement of where an organization is, and then the acceptance of other cultures, because part of this exercise, if we're trying to get everybody within the organization to drop their oars in the water at the same time, we need full participation. And the only way to get that is by creating this sort of culture that makes people feel like, one, I'm a part of this organization, and I'm gonna do every single thing I can to make sure that we're successful. The more people that we get nodding their heads and saying that sort of thing, we start to see some phenomenal results as an organization. And that's some of the most exciting work that we do. I just want to say this as well. The George Floyd incident was a lightning rod for what it is we do in this econometric space, particularly here in Minnesota. We went from this thing where we knew that the concept of culture was important, but corporations now began to think about how do we become a healthier entity and our organization. We can no longer just kick the can down the road thinking, everything's fine. Maybe from where we sit as leaders, that's the case. But there's other people in your organizations that are suffering in silence. And so part of it is to figure out what that is and is there something that we can ultimately do about it. And the first step is courageous leadership. That concept of being curious about the organization in terms of where we sit, how does that fare against other organizations, and how can we get healthier? And the degree to which we get really good at those things, the phenomenal results follow. It's extremely exciting stuff. And I just want to say to Rich Wagner, I applaud the work that's gone on here at Dunwoody. As a trustee, I would tell you that not only are the numbers outstanding, but the leadership's been phenomenal from the standpoint of that curiosity that I'm talking about and that courageous leadership, which is to go find out where we sit. 6 years ago, Rich and I had breakfast at Builders Cafe, and Katie got us set up over there. We were off and running, yep. And we began to talk about this concept of alignment. Rich said, let's get this thing going. I want to measure where we are as it relates to alignment. So we got a score back. They weren't extremely excited about it, but went to work. Literally rolled up their sleeves and put together a plan. And the plan was, how do we become a more aligned organization? How do we message this throughout the entire school? How does it become clear to everyone what it is that we're about and how they contribute to it? One of the first questions that we ask as an organization is, one, do you know the mission and vision? But secondly, can you tell by which it impacts your day-to-day activities? In other words, can you see how your day-to-day activities correlate with that mission? Tough questions, right? But very relevant for what it is that we're talking about. So as we began to ask these questions and we started to get the answers back, put a plan in place, the outcome of that work was to become a more aligned organization. There's no doubt about it. The Ergometric score went up. Performance continued to go up. We knew that we really had something there and extremely excited about it. And now on November 1st, we will launch Equimetrics at Dunwoody as well, which is again that measurement of cultural competency. that concept of, hey, look, now as we become more aligned, we want to be able to sustain that over time. So that piece is extremely exciting. So the encouragement that I want to offer is two things. One, copies of the book and back, certainly feel free if you're interested, I'd be happy to sign. But also it's time to be courageous. It's time to hold ourselves accountable, it's time to hold our organizations accountable. It's time to do the right thing in terms of driving real cultural competency within, because what ends up happening, it ends up helping a community in so many different ways. Thank you.